Theresa May says she's working on getting further assurances from EU leaders in the hope that she can get her Brexit deal through the Commons next week.
Yes, the Prime Minister hosted drinks for backbench Conservative MPs last night, a move seen as an attempt to help overcome divisions in the party. Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay joins us now from Westminster. Morning to you. Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, I just want to ask you about what happened to Anna Soubry yesterday. What do you make about the tone and those scenes? How would you describe them?
Well, I think it was disgraceful behaviour from those protesters. There's clearly a balance to be struck between defending people's right of freedom of speech, but there are boundaries to that in terms of how people are expected to behave. I think people overstep the mark in terms of hurling abuse. I don't think that is what we mean by protecting freedom of speech, and I think it was completely wrong.
Should the police have stepped in?
Well, these are decisions for the police. I know the Speaker of the House of Commons takes a particular close interest in this, as does the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. And clearly people want to review not just that incident, the incident with Owen Jones, the incident with a number of other journalists that we have seen in recent weeks, and look at the area particularly around the House of Commons. But we need to protect people's right to protest. We need to allow people to express their opinions. But at the same time, there are boundaries to that, and we need to get the balance right.
So what's your opinion on the police response?
Well, as I say, I condemned the scenes yesterday. I was actually in the chamber answering an urgent question at the time, so I wasn't actually there. But clearly, the hurling of abuse is unacceptable in the way that we saw yesterday. So we need to protect people's right to protest. As members of Parliament, we serve the public. We need to be part of the public. We need to be accessible to our constituents. But it's about getting the balance of these things right. And clearly, a number of members of Parliament have written to the Police Commissioner. I'm sure the police will be reviewing this, as indeed will the authorities as a whole.
And from your personal point of view, have you detected a change in tone?
Yes, I think it's clear that the last 2 years has been a very divisive time in our politics. The issue of Brexit does provoke very strong emotions on both sides, and this is one of the reasons why I do think it's now time to come together in the national interest to get behind the Prime Minister's deal. It's the only deal after 2 years of hard-fought negotiation that is on the table. The EU leaders are clear that there won't be another deal in the remaining weeks, and I do think now it is time for us to come together as a country to unite behind the Prime Minister's deal, and also then to get on with the many other things that are priorities to your viewers, such as building more homes, such as getting the investment into the NHS that we announced, the extra £20.5 billion of extra funding a year to the NHS, and to concentrate on those other things alongside Brexit.
You say it's the only deal, and the Prime Minister last night meeting opponents to the no deal last night. Are you confident that she can get this deal through Parliament? What are the numbers?
Well, it's challenging, and we've been listening. Prime Minister has been very clear that there is a specific issue of concern around the backstop. She's been listening to members of Parliament on all sides of the House on that, and having those discussions over Christmas with European leaders, with the Taoiseach, with the German Chancellor, with the Dutch Prime Minister, and many others, to make that case. Because it's in both sides' interest to have a deal, to give businesses, to give your viewers the certainty in terms of their jobs, their security that the deal offers. Well, we're making the case, and we're having those discussions, and we're going to have a debate in Parliament starting on Wednesday. Going to have a debate where we will continue to make the case. The event in Downing Street last night was part of that ongoing discussion. But the reality is that members of Parliament who voted to give the public a say, the biggest democratic exercise in our history, members of Parliament who then voted to trigger Article 50, have to then accept the consequence of that is either you have a deal, and the only deal available is the one negotiated by the Prime Minister, or you have no deal. And it's not enough for members of Parliament to simply say what they're against. They have to answer the question, either they're for the Prime Minister's deal or they're accepting the consequence of voting against that, which is the uncertainty that will flow from rejecting that deal.
Can I ask you something which is on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today about the UK, according to their reports, putting out feelers to pause Article 50, i.e. to delay it, to change the date. Is that happening?
No, the government's policy has been clear that we are leaving the European Union on the 29th of March. We're committed to honouring the referendum result for the reasons I've just said. It was the biggest vote in our country's history, and that is what we intend to do. And there's some practical issues where people say, well, there's some practical issues.
Just to be clear.
Let me just answer to why. So it is government policy to leave, but let me just also set out there's some practical issues. So when members of Parliament come on the show and say that they think we should extend, I mean, the first point is it's not actually a unilateral decision of the United Kingdom. It would require the consent of each of the 27 member states. But there'd also be some real practical issues because you couldn't actually pass the legislation for a second referendum ahead of the European parliamentary elections, which are at the end of this May. So there'd be real practical issues in trying to extend, both because it's not a unilateral decision, but also because there'd be real questions with a second referendum. What would the question be? What would the spending limits be?
Right,
what would you do about the European parliamentary elections?
You've outlined the practical issues. Are you ruling out an extension?
Yeah, the government's policy is to leave on the 29th of March.
OK, Stephen Barclay, thanks for joining us here on BBC Breakfast.